That's my patch, Open the Light, for the new Arturia Jupiter 8. This is version 4. I'm going to take a look at this patch, and in doing so, we're going to look at every feature on the Jupiter 8V version 4. And I might flip back and forth between a few different patches to explain different features and what they're doing. On my channel, you'll find an analysis of several different artists where I go through and show the synth sounds that they used, how they put it together, and even the music theory behind it. So be sure and check out my other videos and subscribe. So let's just go from left to right here, starting with the LFO section. My patch is using an LFO. And you can see it's in sync with this light here. And so the first button here is your choice between hertz and sync. So you can have it sync to the tempo of your DAW, or you can have it run based on the hertz value. Click on it, you can see that that's 2.25 hertz, and hertz means cycles per second. Then there's the delay time slider, and that is after you hit the key, how long does it take for the LFO to take effect? 7.5 seconds is the maximum on that. And then you have the choice free running or re-trig. So will it start over every time you press a key, or does the LFO ignore you pressing keys? Then you can choose the waveform that your LFO will be. All right, I've turned the LFO depth up a bit to emphasize it, and I'll let you hear what it does. That's the sine wave, saw wave, square wave, they're calling it noise, but it's kind of a random wave. Then we come to the VCO modulator section, and so that's where you can choose the depth of the LFO to the VCO. So this only affects the oscillator pitch. And then you can have the envelope affect the pitch. You can choose which oscillators, because there's two of them. You can choose which one is affected by your LFO and your envelope, or are they both affected? Then the pulse width modulation, what they're calling the rectangle wave. So it's the pulse wave there. And you can have the LFO affect that. You can manually do it. You can have the envelope do it. And the extent to which that will happen. And then you have cross modulation. Let me switch over to my bell patch that I did. And that's due to cross modulation. The cross modulation takes VCO2 and uses it to affect VCO1 and makes bell sounds and stuff like that. Quite a variety of bell sounds you can get with that. And you have a choice of the range marked in feet, like the conventional organs had. And you can choose the type of wave the VCO1 will be. Triangle, saw, rectangle, square. Square being thought of as being clarinet sounding. Saw thought of as kind of a string sound. And you can actually see why a saw is a string, and the square wave sounds like a clarinet. And the reason it does is because the reed inside the clarinet makes an on-off oscillation many times a second. If you're playing A, I guess 440 times a second. It's flipping back and forth and letting air in an on-off fashion. So when you duplicate that with electronics, it sounds like a clarinet. And then the ramp shape of the saw wave is like the mechanical operation of a violin or something playing on string, because many times per second the bow grabs a hold of the string, lifts it up, and immediately drops it. Picks it up again very slowly and drops it again. So if you're pulling the bow across the string, it's doing that action 440 times a second. So when you duplicate that with electronics, it sounds like a string. The saw can also be used for brass sounds, and for that you use the envelope to shape it more the way your mouth would operate on the brass. To instead of abruptly start the sound, you'll start the sound slowly, like someone pushing air into a brass instrument. Next button is normal and low for the VCO2 range. So you can use VCO2 as an LFO. If you put that on low, and we're going to cross modulate VCO1, let me turn this LFO off. So this is VCO2's sine wave. By means of cross modulation here, is feeding into VCO1 with a low setting, so more of a LFO speed setting, and it's modulating the pitch of it. Typically though, you would use it for bell type of sound or cross modulation. You have the fine tune for VCO2. VCO1 doesn't have that. So you could have two saw waves and detune one. For kind of a chorusy sound. And then you have sync, where this rectangle wave or this pulse wave of VCO2 is being forced to reset according to the cycles of VCO1. You can see that VCO1 is staying steady in its pitch, but its cycle length is forcing VCO2 to reset even when it hasn't finished a cycle. And VCO2 is falling in pitch due to this envelope. And because it's falling in pitch, its wave lengths and cycles are changing as it is reset by the cycle length of VCO1, and it makes a strange sound when it is abruptly reset many times a second. And then we get to the mixer, the source mix. You can mix between VCO1 and 2, or you can have both. And my patch Open the Light uses the noise. Just a little bit though. It's primarily made up of the saw wave, but it does add noise to it. And this is the high pass filter. And then the low pass filter. In resonance. And 12 dB or 24 dB slope of the filter. And then the modulation, where you can choose whether it's envelope 1 modulating the filter or envelope 2. Typically, you'll use envelope 1. You can turn the cutoff all the way down then, because the envelope is opening and closing the filter now. You don't have to have it physically open like that. Then you can choose for the LFO to modulate your filter. So let me turn this off, and you'll hear the LFO modulating the filter. Then there's key follow. With key follow all the way up, the low note sounds dull. And as I turn it down, all the way down, the low note is bright. All the way up, the high note is brighter. So you can adjust the balance of brightness between high and low notes so that your patch sounds consistent up and down the keyboard. Then the VCA level, which is just generally the volume level. It can be controlled by envelope 2 or LFO for kind of a tremolo effect. Okay, now we get to the envelopes. Envelope 1 was typically used to control the VCF. Envelope 2 is typically used to control the VCA or volume. So you have one for the tone of it, one for the volume. Okay, what this is indicating is that envelope 1 will now modulate the filter. We can turn the cutoff all the way down initially and use the envelope to shape the filter as we want to. So we start turning up the decay. And we hear some sound. Now here you could use this for bass sounds because you have a quick opening and closing of the filter. Put a little resonance with that and go a little lower. And you see how you could get a bass sound out of that. Now what's happening is if I were to open and close this real fast, the cutoff, manually, that's what's happening over here. The envelope is doing that for me. It's opening and closing real fast every time I hit the key. Now, let's say I wanted to open up the cutoff really slowly and then bring it down. That's what the attack is for. It says how slowly it's going to open up. So if I put it up here, now it'll open slowly and close. Make it even slower. Now, typically with a brass instrument, it opens slow. And somewhere right in this range here would be ideal for brass. Well, the sustain is what volume level will it remain at when I'm holding down the key after the decay cycle. And the release is once I let go of the key. That's what that's all about. How long will it continue to ring out? I like to turn these both up high and let the notes smear over one another. And we're just using envelope 2 to control the volume. If we turn these down and then slowly turn the decay up, again we get the quick opening and closing of the VCA this time because it's controlling this. So it's equivalent of me manually raising and lowering this level. Raise slowly. And I can have it come down to the sustain level while I hold the key. And I can decide when I let off the key, how long is it going to ring out. with the release. That's what typically what envelope 1 and envelope 2 do. Then you have your overall volume and your overall master tuning. You have your unison detune, which if it's over here in the voice assign section, if it is set to unison, which means all the oscillators play on one note. You can make a super saw type of sound by detuning all of those saws that are playing together. Back into the poly mode, pan spread is going to send the oscillators to the left or right or center as you play them. If you're listening to this in stereo, then you've got portamento, which is glide. You have dispersion, which is a new function. If you click this little panel here, you can see what's going on. That the voices can be slightly different in pitch, like an analog synthesizer would be. Pulse width can hit at different spots, envelope, cutoff, and give it a little more analog feel as you play. Each oscillator will vary a little bit. There's 3 different levels of that and a custom level where you can set them like you want them. Then the voice assign, solo, you'll be playing bass or mono. Unison, where you play one note and it has all the oscillators and you can use the detune. 2 different poly modes. This is for if you have a long release. Over here in the envelope section, if we had used that long release where the notes are smearing over one another, we can get that with this poly mode. But with this poly mode, the second one, it will not allow that to happen because the new notes will cut off the old notes. Then hold is used if you want an arpeggio to turn the arpeggiator on. And I'm not holding the keys right now. I don't have to hold them down because I hit the hold button. Hit that, it turns it off, and I have to hold the keys down to get my arpeggiation. And you have a range, that's the octave range. So that's covering 1 octave, 2, 3, 4. And the pattern of the arpeggio. Does it just go up, down only, reverse, random? And does the arpeggiator go according to hertz, so certain number of cycles a second, or is it synced to the tempo of your DAW? And you have your bender functions here for your mod and wheel and bender. And down here at the bottom you see various things where you have undo, show the history of undo and redo. And this is something new compared to version 3, is that now we have macro knobs here at the bottom. So to access those, you hit this settings button. Well, you see the general settings, the MIDI. Macro pertains to these 4 dials down here, and you can set it up custom right now. Brightness handles VCF cutoff. Timbre is doing the resonance. Time is doing 4 different envelope functions. Movement deals with these LFOs, but this is custom. You could go down here to add destination and make those customized. Then there are some tutorials in there. Now for the advanced functions. So down here I had talked about this new function, dispersion, where you can have the pitch of various oscillators be a little bit out of tune compared to the others. And typically what I would do is come up here to the modulation, choose sample and hold. And with these settings here, that I'm exaggerating it here, this is the depth over here on the right. So let me exaggerate it just to show you what it does. So every time I play the same note, it sounds different. And so I would prefer to use something like that varies as opposed to something down here with the voice dispersion, which is going to be static. And then there's a second LFO, or actually the third for the entire synthesizer. Or you have one right here, and then you have these 2. Then you have a modulation mixer where you can actually mix the two LFOs. You can choose to sum them and other math functions of the two together, and then choose that destination of where that goes to. It has a sequencer, and it has keyboard functions that can be sent to various destinations. So those are the destinations possible for the velocity to control. So the harder you play, you could have a reverb function change, or any of your delay function changes. You could have no delay, and then when you hit the key hard, you get a delay, that type of thing. But you can also control typical things that you would use velocity control, like filter settings, things like that. Aftertouch can control things. Mod wheel can control keyboard tracking. Then you have your effects, so you can have a parametric EQ. If you double click these settings, they will return to their defaults. So obviously in the song Open the Light, the keyboard sound pans all over the place, and so there is stereo panning here as one of the effects. And overdrive. And here are the various ones that are available for these. You can choose to run these in a series so that one effect runs into the next, and you can also have them run independently. And that is all the functions on the new Jupiter 8. Now I will mention that they've taken away the most important thing about the Jupiter 8V. And in version 3, it had split and layer, so you could layer up sounds together. You could have the bass on the left hand and have the strings on the right hand, and for whatever reason they took that function away, and that's the most important function to me on this synth. And I have hundreds of patches for version 3 that are not compatible with this new version, and so I can't use any of those patches, and I can't do, many of them are intended to use as splits and layers, and so I can't use any of those. So I won't be using this synth, but I guess for the future this will show you how to use this synth, and everything here pretty much applies to version 3 if you have that as well. Just pointing that out. Glad you could join me for this. See you in the next video.